Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this side event focused on the energy transition, maritime, and the whole value chain approach. Today we will have two panels, one discussing the clean energy marine hubs and the role of the shipping sector in the energy transition, and immediately after we will transition into the second panel focused on the whole value chain approach. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to our moderator, Stuart Neal from the International Chamber of Shipping. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me, and I hope shortly you'll be able to hear Alice Larkin from the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research at the University of Manchester. I've also got a great panel here with me, and we'll be joined shortly by Roland Roesch from the IRENA, but on my left and your right, we have Guy Platten, the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping. We have Uwe Lauber, who is the CEO of MAN Energy, who produce an awful lot of engines for ships and a whole lot of other things within the industrial space. And on the far side there is Dr. Prasoon Agarwal, who's the Deputy Head of the Clean Energy Ministerial, who we are working with in partnership to create the Hubs initiative. So before we hand over to Alice, let me just ask Guy to say a few words and introduce where we're coming from. No? Okay. I'll do that then.
It's okay, Dave. I'm Guy Platten, International Chamber of Shipping. For those who haven't heard of the ICS, we're an association of associations, national shipowner associations, representing approximately 80% of the world's merchant fleet. And really pleased to be here today.
Thanks, Guy. So it was this time last year when we were hearing lots of announcements about great plans for transporting hydrogen around the world, and we were talking to governments and said, how are you going to do that? And there was a silence. We thought we'd better find out what was really going on. So who's better to ask than Professor Alice Larkin and her team at the University of Manchester to actually look at this and come up with the reality of what's going on. So let me hand over to you, Alice.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I'm assuming that you can hear me okay. Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about shipping's role in the global energy transition. This is work that we've done at the University of Manchester, the Tyndall Centre, working with the International Chamber of Shipping. And I'm presenting on behalf of a big team of researchers. So if there are detailed questions, very happy to take them, but we'll also probably field them to the experts as well, if that's okay with everybody. So just moving on to the next slide. What does the global energy transition mean for shipping? Well, very briefly, in summary terms, shipping will be transporting different fuels in different quantities between different countries. And if we are wanting to deliver a 1.5 degree future, then this needs to happen and needs to start urgently. So what we've done in this work is we've been looking at some of the 1.5 degree energy scenarios from the IPCC, from IEA, and also from IRENA, and looking at what that means for what we will be transporting around the world in terms of fuels of the future, and also trying to understand the implications, not just for the energy system, but also for shipping. Now, firstly, just focusing on the energy scenarios and the energy system in general, so this is in the global energy system, there are some common themes in our 1.5 degree scenarios. So firstly, they had reductions in global energy consumption overall in absolute terms, a rapid electrification of many sectors, so car transport being one obvious one, rapid decarbonisation of electricity with renewables, particularly solar and wind, replacing coal and gas, rapid reductions in fossil fuel use, and then growth in lower carbon fuels such as hydrogen and bioenergy. Now, the importance for shipping, of course, is that these are all big energy system changes, but 36% of the tons traded by ship are energy products. So, of course, this has big implications for shipping. Now, this is a bit of a complicated graph, but on the left-hand side, we've got the energy products transported in million tons. And then we have a baseline bar there in 2020. And then we have our different scenarios in 2030 and in 2050. And the colours, so blue, orange and grey are showing the fossil fuels, and then yellow, blue and green showing some of the green fuels. And what you see firstly is this drop in energy consumption overall, and this is in terms of the energy products that would be transported. This is actually a high export assumption applied to these scenarios. There is a lower one as well. But even there, you've got a lower amount of the fuels being transported, but you also have a big growth in these alternative fuels, particularly by 2050, but even by 2030. So there are big changes to what we will be transporting. So in terms of implications for shipping, the shipping of energy products falls. A growth in hydrogen and bioenergy is actually outweighed by the falls in coal and oil, which is why you end up with this reduction overall. 90 to 100% fall in coal shipments by 2050, a 50 to 90% fall in oil shipments by 2050. Gas consumption falls, but a greater proportion of that gas is expected to be transported. And then we have hydrogen and transported probably as ammonia, likely to be as high as gas today, and then bioenergy possibly as high as coal today. And I should also emphasize that underpinning the 1.5 degree scenarios are big assumptions around negative emission technologies, which should also be remembered because this is actually a contested issue. So shipping needs to prepare now for a rapid transition away from transporting coal and oil and opportunities for transporting bioenergy and ammonia, which is likely to be what we would transport hydrogen as. However, one of the other parts of the analysis that we did was we wanted to understand how big a gap is it at the moment between what is expected and planned for these alternative fuels, so for hydrogen and for bioenergy, and what is expected and needed to deliver on these 1.5 degree scenarios, which everybody knows are incredibly challenging. So this graph here has got the low carbon hydrogen required in million tonnes to fill the gap between what is being proposed and what is operational, and then what is in these 1.5 degree scenarios. Now, the red and the blue bars there are from the scenarios that we analysed, and then with IRENA's scenario, it's just all in yellow because there wasn't the differentiation that we could pick out in terms of existing and new uses. But a key point to emphasise is that we need to move away from grey hydrogen in existing uses of hydrogen and make that lower, so green or blue hydrogen first, as well as looking at new uses for hydrogen, and that's why we have such a big gap. And this is just a snapshot for 2030. But if you look at the green bars, this is what is actually operational or proposed to be on stream by 2030. We are seeing a rapid acceleration in the sort of proposed plans and projects around hydrogen, but there's a huge gap between what is needed in the 1.5 degree scenarios and what's going on. And then if we look at bioenergy, this is primary bioenergy consumption or production, and looking at the different scenarios again with the baseline. So this isn't the transported, this is overall. What I want to draw your attention to here, because again, we've got the different types of biomass and we've got the different scenarios, but it's biofuel where there's the biggest change and the biggest growth, and this would have to be sustainable biofuel. So we're talking about this light blue area here, and percentage annual growth rates of between 7 and into the teens percentages in order to deliver on these scenarios. So a huge ramp up of bioenergy, biofuel in particular. So in terms of ships and these new fuels, a few ammonia insights. So the expectation is that shipping will be, we'll be shipping ammonia rather than hydrogen because hydrogen is a gas at room temperature. It's best then, because there will be an energy penalty to reconvert that back into hydrogen and an economic penalty if the end use is ammonia. Now, I mentioned existing hydrogen uses. You know, we have to make sure that the grey hydrogen and grey ammonia is converted into green and blue. So we need to target those existing uses first. We are seeing that ammonia is becoming more economically viable as a result of the gas price change. And it also actually, from a geopolitical point of view, does reduce the reliance on gas if there is a big ramp up in hydrogen and ammonia. In terms of the vessels that's required, this is just the numbers of vessels. So it doesn't give you the capacity here, but just to give you a sense of ammonia carriers built per year. And the estimate with a number of assumptions underneath is that we would need something of the order of 20 large ammonia carriers every year to be being built in order to reduce this gap and make sure we've got the infrastructure. So what's needed to close the gap and realise these grand plans for future generations? where we need to connect consumers and producers much better. We need large infrastructure investments for scale up. We need to treat hydrogen as a valuable and a scarce resource. It's not going to be for every sector. Electricity is going to play a very big role. We need to decarbonise the existing sources first, so get away from grey hydrogen. And we need also a greater focus on imports in consumer countries. So we need innovations such as the Hydrogen H2 global auction in Germany, long-term bilateral contracts, things that connect the consumer and the producer. But we also must account for the life cycle impact, so the sustainability implications of these fuels. So for the shipping sector to 2030, we will be cutting the use and transport of fossil fuels if we're going to realise these 1.5 degree scenarios. The technical know-how for transporting ammonia and bioenergy exists, but scale-up is the issue, so that needs to be the focus. We need to prioritise on enabling growth in low-carbon hydrogen and its transport. EU and Asia is the largest growth potential in terms of consumption. We need to be building ammonia carriers to be ammonia fuel ready so that we can also decarbonise those ships when they're transporting ammonia. And we need to scale up initiatives such as the clean energy marine hubs that better connect the energy system to transport to really make the benefit and accelerate this change that's needed. So if shipping and the shipping sector can energise faster growth in sustainable fuels, it will be playing a pioneering role in the closing of this gap between these grand theoretical plans and a real world that's fit for future generations. Thank you. There's some links here to where you can find the full report.
Thank you very much indeed, Alice, and hopefully there's food for thought. As you can see, the report is on the Tyndall Centre website. It'll also be on the International Chamber of Shipping website as well. But again, it's coming from this perspective of all industries, and you see this at COP. Everyone's thinking in silos, and this is trying to cut across that to see where the real value is for all sectors. So I'm going to use my panel here to hopefully respond to what they've just heard, but also bring in their perspectives. And I think what I might want to do actually is start with our colleagues from the energy sector. So I won't throw Roland in straight under it because he's just arrived. But perhaps Prasoon, can I ask you? You've heard that now, and you know your team are working with our team on the hubs. But how does that fit with what you're hearing in the broader energy system?
Thanks, thanks, Stuart. Very good afternoon. I think before I begin, a strong word of appreciation for the International Chamber of Shipping, Secretary Platten, and of course Stuart and Nelson, to bring together this conversation where it's a merger of a few communities: the shipping community, the transportation community, and the energy community. And while we talk a lot about and hear a lot about communities and conversations and sectors coming together, I mean this is where really it is happening. So I think credit where it is due. I think that's something I should say upfront, and we're really proud representing the energy community that this conversation is happening. It's high time for these cross-sectoral conversation to happen. So since I'm talking to an audience from primarily a transport sector, I don't assume you don't know the Clean Energy Ministerial. So let me start with that. So we are essentially an intergovernmental initiative, a platform where 29 forward-leaning countries who are really leading the global clean energy transition came together almost 10 years back and try to look at the sector from an all-sector approach. So not just purely power sector focused discussion, but an all-sector, all-economy approach to clean energy transition. And of course, at the apex, we have the Clean Energy Ministerial, where once in a year, the ministers from these countries meet in a way to review the agenda, but also to lead and to inspire the community on what's looking ahead. But then we have a number of initiatives operating year-round under that architecture. And I think in our observation, what we have seen is the global energy transition is moving from a purely power sector, electricity-focused discussion to an all-sector focused discussion, which is very complex, which is where conversations like this come in. Because you're not just talking about electrification, you're talking about electrification which will be driven by solar and wind. And then once you talk about electrification itself, you have different sectors coming in, like transportation, like building, like shipping, and it really makes the architecture very complex. And in a way, the transition really influences and alters the structure of these sectors. something that we just saw in the report from Tyndall. I think it really puts some stark insights out there. I mean, 36% of the shipping industry freight is fossil fuel. Now that I don't think is going to exist. None of us here, at least as a reason we are here, we don't want that to exist in perhaps, a near future. That's really going to change everything. And even in our own initiatives on hydrogen, on biofuels, we see the future looking very different, shipping large distances of hydrogen between Chile to Netherlands, Saudi Arabia to Japan, and very similarly, something that Tyndall colleague also mentioned on biofuels, a lot of volume of biofuels being transported across. So what does it mean for the transport sector? What does it mean for the movements? What does it mean for the value chain? I think these are questions which are really open up in there, and this is where this dialogue and initiatives like the Clean Energy Marine Hub are needed to discuss, deliberate in a cross-stakeholder, cross-sectoral platform just to see where things are. So I think we really excited about this initiative. I think it's very quickly picking up momentum. COP has been an excellent milestone in the Clean Energy Marine Hub initiative. All credit to our colleagues from ICS. And I think we have the ministerial event in July next year where we plan to have a revisit on this conversation and hopefully formally launch the initiative and formally welcome ICS, IAPH, and the shipping sector to the clean energy ministerial community. Thanks. I'll pause here, Stuart.
Thank you. And yeah, we're excited about working with SEM and with other partners as well. Roland, we've used a lot of the knowledge that IRENA have provided to help this work, and I know Alice has been working, and her team have been working with your team as well. Where do you see the lessons coming from this work, and what you're looking at as well?
Thank you very much for the question, and of course this cooperation with the shipping industry is extremely important for us. So the International Chamber of Shipping is also a very important partner of IRENA in the work to decarbonize the shipping sector. And it's very clear the decarbonization of shipping is not only important because the sector is large, a large greenhouse gas emitter. It is about 2.8% of the global emissions, but also because it will play a role in the decarbonization of other industries, supplying them clean renewable fuels. It is a key sector of the economy. And I would like to make a point here that is very important for IRENA. So we did a study on how the green hydrogen trade will go on, and we see that 50% of the green hydrogen trading will go through ammonia, but the other 50% will go through shipping. And so that means there is a logistical task to be handled by the shipping sector to make sure that, and these ammonia value chains are also not very easy. So to make sure there is a connection between ports, the shipping sector, and the manufacturing of the shipping sector, and also a certain alignment between the member countries of IRENA, their plans to use hydrogen in the decarbonization for steel production, in chemicals, and also in aviation is kind of linked with the shipping sector. Further, there is a need to highlight the urgency with which this transition need to take place. New ships take years to build, and they have a long useful life. If we are not hit the targets, the change needs to start today. And it is very important, let's say, to my knowledge, there is not really a ship that can go now by green hydrogen or ammonia by now. There is some testing I'm aware of, but I think we need to have engine, we need to have ships, and we have to organize the logistic also for the use of alternative fuels, green hydrogen, ammonia in the shipping sector. In the short term, emission reductions in the sector can be achieved with rapid implementation of energy efficiency designs and operational measures across the fleets. But of course, this is the kind of first and easy thing you can do. In the medium and long term, it will be about displacing fossil fuels with renewable based fuels. And I think there we have a challenge in front of us. When we did the first hydro shipping fuel report and decarbonizing fuel report, I think it was in 2019, we saw how efficient the current energy sector is and how cheap the current fuel the ships using are. And let's say you see that this is a very challenging thing. And we did a calculation and saying, okay, we need a very, very, very high CO2 emission cost price to make this happen. So there is a lot of work to be done. But there seems to be consensus around green ammonia as the main contender for clean shipping fuel for the future. However, it would be good to remember that advanced biofuels can play a role, at least in the short term, and can work with existing technology already. The challenge is, of course, scaling up the volumes and ensuring a fully sustainable supply chain. Governments and relevant stakeholders in the sector need to work closely and ensure that there are no bottlenecks in this transition. They need to identify ways to incentivize and accelerate the demand for renewable fuels, establish frameworks to facilitate the trade and transport of these fuels, and ensure availability of supply of these fuels, scaling up volumes and deploying the necessary infrastructure. And we are going to organize a ministerial roundtable with leads of states and ministers, responsible ministers for renewable energies and also for the transport sector. Will be there in Abu Dhabi in the 16th of January to discuss the options of how we can improve the greening of the shipping sector, having the dialogue with, and that goes back to what I said before, managing the logistics of the green energy transition. We intend to bring in, let's say, several ministers. Of course, IRENA has 165 member countries. They will be there, many represented on a minister or at least on a very high level. And we would like to discuss with port operators, with shipping associations and owner of ships, like let's say in there a partner is the International Chamber of Shipping, but also we will bring in, let's say, port authorities and hopefully, let's say, engineers that know about the technologies to use green fuels in the shipping in the future. And we have to have this dialogue to advance the agenda on this topic, which is so important. And IRENA is really happy to assist there, the member countries, and we look forward to a fluid dialogue amongst the different stakeholders of the shipping sector, including the governments. So IRENA is ready to support its member governments and facilitate this dialogue on greening the shipping industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. And a perfect segue into Uwe, who runs a company who is an engineer and has looking at this in great detail, especially the ammonia and the safety issues. So, Uwe.
So thank you very much for having the possibility to share with you here our point of view to the shipping's role in the energy transition. And like Roland said, I mean, if I would have the right crystal ball, it would be much easier for me as an engineer, because I'm also responsible for engineering and development. The future as such will be much more complex in the shipping industry. That's quite obvious. The past was heavy fuel oil. That was quite normal. You can bunker it everywhere around the globe. So what is the future fuel? If I would have the right crystal ball, I would give you the answer right away. Whether it's synthetic methane or LNG or biofuel or ammonia, green ammonia at the end of the day, or methanol, e-methanol, The basis is quite sure. It's driven by hydrogen. And hydrogen being made out of renewable energy sources, and that comes, what a surprise, we need electricity, renewable energy. Before I dive down into this topic, let me take the opportunity to introduce the company MAN Energy Solutions right away. We have more than 260 years of industrial tradition, so to say. In our premises, in Augsburg, in our headquarters, the first diesel engine has been invented by Rudolf Diesel. Maybe you know that already. So we are also, and that is also important to know, and at the same time I would like to underline, it's our obligation as a company. We are the biggest marine propulsion builder in the world. So most of the engines which are equipped on the ships are driven with our engines. So on one side, we need to think about the existing fleet, and on the other side, of course, what is the future? The future for me is more easier, so to say, because you can build engines from scratch. But what shall we do with 20,000 engines? They are, as of today, out in the fleet, out in operation. And they're going to be in operation for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Our message is clear, and please take that as a given. The technology is ready in order to achieve the climate targets. There's no doubt. They now need to be brought to the market, and we need to speed that up. Which direction is it? That's quite clear. Efficiency measures, Roland has mentioned it right away, and direct electrification by renewable energy is key, there's no doubt on that side, but hydrogen will undoubtedly play a significant role once it comes to these alternative fuels, and I try to avoid ammonia because I see ammonia as the ultimate goal because there's no C molecule in it, so that's really the key driver, but I have my doubt that you want to sail on a ship equipped with an ammonia engine these days because it's not a proven design. Today, as I said before, we have built purely hydrogen engines 20 years ago already. There's no problem with that. We have built LNG or synthetic methane driven engines, also no problem. E-methanol or methanol is not a problem. You might remember or read in the press that Maersk ordered 19 methanol engines just recently. So this is proven technology already more than 5 years in operation. There's no problem with that. Ammonia, okay, Roland, you're right. It's on the way. It's on the way. The first tests are looking promising. So one cylinder test has been made in 24, which for the shipping industry is tomorrow, is available for sales. 90% of the goods are being traded worldwide or being transported via shipping industry. That is a key factor, and you should keep that in mind. And as I said before, 50% is powered by our engines. So let's do not only talk about the future, let's talk about today. What can we do to address the CO2 emissions on the engines which are out in the fleet, out on the oceans? 20,000, more than 20,000 only equipped with our engines. So we thought about it because it's our obligation to do so. We have to offer an energy solution device, so to say, because this is in our name, of course. We have to offer them also a solution, so retrofits. So ship owners came to us and asked, okay, fine. We have the money because shipping industry today, and I knock on wood, is on a good shape right now. So money is there to invest. But then the question comes, which type of fuel is it? Can you answer it? I mean, I talked this week only in Hamburg to several ship owners, and I got multiple answers. So as of today, the answer is they are all dual fuel. They need to have security, which means on one side, they can operate still with heavy fuel oil because these new type of fuels, they are not always available, but once they are available, they can do so. So I would like to share you one example how we do it and how we show and demonstrate it to the world. In September last year, in 21, a container ship called the Elbe Blue has been equipped in 2013 with a heavy fuel oil driven engine. That has been converted because this entrepreneurial owner came to us and said, I want to reduce my CO2 footprint. At that point in time, LNG was the idea. So we converted it to LNG, to gas, which was a very difficult and complicated, and specifically from a technology point of view, and not an easy task to convert a heavy fuel oil driven engine versus a gas engine. Yeah? You need to have tanks, you need to have fuel gas supply systems, different control systems, and you need also trained people. And if we are talking about ammonia or even methanol, I mean, I'm a little bit worried about the crew on board. Huh? Do they have the know-how? Are they trained enough? So also there's, beside of the technical challenges, there are a lot of challenges which are driving that. So this ship, this vessel, the Elbe Blue, it's a 1,000 TEU container vessel, small one of course. He had the idea to blend synthetic methane, which came out of our Power-to-X plant in northern part of Germany, out of Welte. So we blended 20% of the capacity, and only by doing that, the CO2 emissions per year has been reduced by 50,000 tons. Why do I tell you that? We need to have a roadmap, and our customers, they need to have security in their investments, what they're doing, and at the same time, of course, reducing the overall CO2 footprint. If we dream and if we believe that this will be done from one day to the other, forget it. Hydrogen-based fuels will be only available in the quantities which we need from 2030. But we have to start now, and hydrogen production really is really the key. The maritime industry consumes around about 300 million tons of fuel. 300 million tons, equivalent to 3% or 2.8% CO2 emissions. If we only want to address 1%, we need to produce 1 million ton of hydrogen and around about 6 to 7 million tons of CO2 to produce green synthetic methane or even e-methanol. These are quantities, they are so huge. So the amount of hydrogen is key, and the hydrogen production is predominantly the key factor for the ramp up of our industry. From an engine perspective, the technology, as I said, is there. The question is really how fast can we ramp up these alternative fuels, and specifically where do we get hydrogen, green hydrogen, and do we get the right priorities? Because there's a fighting for funds. The aviation industry is in a similar situation. Other industries, like the car industries, wherever you can use electricity, please do it. Please do it. There's no other way to do that. But also in other areas of the world, there's no other way to think about synthetic fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. If it's for you, Guy, obviously we were hearing a lot of these plans, and shipping does look in its silo, and there's a much broader picture. You know, what's your reaction to what Alice has produced, and also what we're hearing here as well? And how can we move that faster forward?
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. And it's been a really interesting debate. Some really good points there. I think, yes, we have been very guilty of just being in a silo as an industry. And what struck me with the conversations I've had as we've broadened our outreach is just what a critical role shipping is going to play in the overall decarbonisation. It really isn't going to happen without shipping. As you already say, 90% of everything travels by sea, worth $14 trillion a year. We're going to be shipping many of the new green fuels. So without shipping, it's just not going to work. So I think there's a few things that we need to engage far more on with other stakeholders to make sure that shipping is very much part of the plans for overall decarbonisation. And yes, of course, we want to decarbonise our own industry, and that will happen. The technology is there, and it needs to mature and be built at scale. So I have no doubt that technology-wise we can do it, but we also need to see the opportunity that will present to shipping. We also touched on the safety aspects as well of these new fuels. That's absolutely vital. And earlier this week, along with the UN Global Compact, the International Transport Workers Federation, IMO, and the ILO, we launched our latest announcements and 10-point work plan on the just transition for the Maritime Task Force. So make sure as we go embark on this decarbonisation journey, we bring our workforce with us. So we upskill them. We put safety at the forefront of everything we do. And I suppose in a roundabout, nothing's going to happen in isolation. Nothing's going to happen sequentially. Everything's going to have to move in parallel if we're actually going to achieve this decarbonisation goals, which, the 1.5%, which Alice so articulately spoke about during her presentation.
Thanks, Guy. Alice, you've been listening attentively, and obviously you and the team have been looking at this. Are there any items that you've picked up there, or some other lessons that you think we need to be focusing on to try and accelerate these transitions? It's interesting, the sort of difference between ammonia and not.
Yeah. I mean, it's hugely challenging, as everybody recognises, and I think that some of the things that I picked out, that this word complexity is beyond, things are going to get more complex, and this isn't just for shipping, this is for this whole transition. And there aren't silver bullets out there, which is the other lesson that we very much learned when we've looked at wider energy work, and certainly is applicable here with the debate around shipping. But the thing that really to keep in mind is this time frame, and as Guy said, multiple things are going to have to be happening all at the same time, to get ourselves ready. And things like the skills and the training and so on. We know that things are going to be different. I think that in relation to that silver bullet and what can we do now, we need to start working towards this now. And there is a transition to be had, but I do think we have to be very careful about not overly investing in transition fuels that are going to take us in the wrong direction or lock us into that kind of high carbon direction of travel, because we're focusing in this work on fuels, significantly on hydrogen, on bioenergy. But there are other ways in which to reduce energy consumption. There are other mechanisms such as slow steaming. We do work in Manchester on wind propulsion, for example, and on other technologies. And interestingly, you talked about using electricity where we can use electricity, which I think is a really key point for the energy system more generally. These fuels are going to be needed in more niche markets like shipping, maybe like in industry, as opposed to in sort of domestic and other sort of land-based transport. So that's where these fuels need to be targeted. But equally, there might be a role for electricity in certain segmentations of the shipping sector. We're looking at short sea shipping and other things like that as well. So, I think shipping is already complex. Looking at where the solutions are appropriate for different markets, and just making sure that what we don't do is lock ourselves into some of the higher carbon routes that inevitably we're using fuels today. And I think preparing ships to be multi-fuel, dual fuel is important, but ensuring that we are also actively working together with energy stakeholders to make sure that we are really mindful of things like such as liquid natural gas, which is not a low carbon fuel, needing to move away from fossil fuels altogether. That's the direction of travel that we need to go in, and it needs to happen very, very fast.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you for all the work of the team. I'm just going to ask my panel, we've got 6 minutes, so I've got 1 minute for each of you. What are the things that for the sector to think about, whether it's governments, whether it's industry, what's the thing? It's always the one. What's the one thing that we need to focus on? So I'm going to start very far with Roland, and the sort of the one takeaway that you'd want us to take from this work and move forward in our journey.
Thank you. I think it's very important what I said before, the scaling up of renewable-based alternative fuels for the shipping sector is the key thing. I already said the shipping sector is quite efficient at the moment, and there is extremely cheap fuels that are used. This creates a challenge in seeing how can we ramp up the fuel that needs to be integrated into the shipping sector in itself is a little bit separate and is not a key interest of the countries that have their plans in how to use alternative fuels in their internal national plans. And these elements have to be linked, and I think IRENA can play a role there, because with our member countries and us knowing the plans in in ramping up of green hydrogen and how this can be used in the different economies and how this can be best linked to the shipping sector logistic-wise, but also in the context of using the shipping fuel at certain routes where you can start with green shipping is very important, because the countries that have renewable resources to produce green hydrogen and can have basically bunkering of green alternative fuels need to be the ones that define the first lines where you can start in the best economic way, also in a best economic efficient way, start with the routes in operating. That's very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Roland. And Prasoon.
Thanks, Stuart. So, I've been part of a few conversations over the last few days. One was with steel industry, this morning with Roland, it was with the smart grid community, and now with shipping. I think one key message that I pick up from all these conversations, which is quite interesting, is that technology is not a problem. It is available. Yes, in some cases it's not there, but it will arrive, it is in the works. I think there are things beyond technology, and I think this technocentric view of conversations has to really evolve. And that's where it is important to look at dimensions like de-risking, and Dr. Uwe here talked about it. De-risking in terms of the value chain, de-risking in terms of supply. I think those are important issues. Number two, which is where I think the government has to step up, which is on increasing ambition. Because it's clearly the right signal that they can give to the market that yes, we are moving ahead in this direction, and please follow us or perhaps even lead us. And number three is something that I alluded in my initial intervention, is getting all the stakeholders together. We cannot afford to have these conversations in different groups in our community and just enjoy those conversations. We have to have difficult conversations across communities, across sectors to move together. So I think those are my not one but three takeaways and something for us to work together, Stuart. Thanks.
Thank you. Uwe.
So 1 minute left, you're right? So I would say debottlenecking the value chain is really important, and everything starts from building up green energy sources and in order to produce hydrogen. And this topic of creating and producing hydrogen is a global topic. So projects like H2 Global shows that it can work. So we need alliances. So one government cannot do it by themselves. We need to create alliances with countries living in the Sun Belt, in Australia, in Chile, wherever you can produce electricity as a very low, with low money, of course. And then, of course, the next bottleneck is electrolyzers. The electrolyzers industries today, they are only handmade apparatus, so to say. So the PEM electrolyzers, we have one in our company. We're going to invest a lot of money there in order to ramp it up. But it takes 2 to 3 years. So then already down the road we are 3 years. And once this has been established, I would address one wish to the politicians, because getting the permissions to build these plants, to build the plants, because we are just on a way to deliver electrolyzers units. The plant itself is ready to go, but they have no permission since 12 months because the rules and regulations are not set. That is really a pity, and that hinders us to speed it up. So speed is key, but I mean, let's do it together, and the rest, everything has been said so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Uwe, and one very short minute, Guy, I'm afraid.
I'm just going to say the lessons we learned during the COVID crisis, when the shipping industry came together like never before, we need to use those lessons, those learnings as we move to the next stage in our decarbonisation journey. Collaboration, partnership is going to be absolutely key.
Thank you. And hopefully this is seen as an opportunity as well, rather than a problem. So we're going to stop now from this panel, but please don't go anywhere because our colleagues are coming up to take over, although Guy, you are staying here. But if you give everyone a round of applause. And thank you, Alice.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. And while we switch out the panelists, I'll invite our panel to come on up to the stage, and I'll just do some brief introductory remarks. Today, we're going to discuss the value chain approach to decarbonizing maritime shipping. And I think this panel is an excellent sequence to the prior panel. I think every one of the speakers mentioned the value chain and the need for collaborative approaches. My name's Leah Dundon. I'm with Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee in the US, where we work on a number of things in the engineering school, including shipping decarbonization. So as I mentioned, today we're going to discuss the value chain approach to decarbonizing shipping. The entire ecosystem of shipping is really built around the study, extraction, financing, insuring, storage, regulating all of marine diesel, including engines that can burn it, vessels that can carry it. It's an entire ecosystem. So we need that whole ecosystem to shift to different types of fuels. So the premise of the value chain approach is really that no one piece of that puzzle can solve this problem, can do it alone. A ship owner or operator may want to change, they may even have the financing to change, but without the engine manufacturers on board, without the fuel supply and transport infrastructure, without the insurers, without the regulators to do the safety regulations, it won't be able to happen. The other important part of a collaboration and the value chain approach is that first movers need to trust that the value chain that they operate within is going to be there and is moving in the same direction. No one piece of that puzzle wants to invest in option A if the value chain is moving towards option B. So collaboration around this problem is extremely important. Here at Vanderbilt, we are a founding member of Blue Sky Maritime Coalition. You're going to hear from one of our panelists, who is the president and CEO of Blue Sky, which is a group centered around getting the value chain organizations to collaborate. So today we have a great panel lined up. I'll just introduce each one very briefly. And if you could raise your hand when I say your name. David Cummins, as I mentioned, president and CEO of Blue Sky Maritime Coalition, nonprofit coalition formed just last year to pursue this value chain approach in North America in particular. They have over 100 members from the entire shipping value chain. Guy Platten, who you saw on the last panel, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping. He's also a master mariner and has had a number of senior positions, both at sea and not, including Chief Executive of the UK Chamber of Shipping and now obviously at ICS. Commissioner Hamdi Mohammed, we have with us, who is the Commissioner of the Port of Seattle. Commissioner Mohammed was elected to her position just last year, and she has a long connection at the Port of Seattle through both her family and her professional work. And we have Ms. Judah Paulus, who is a member of the European Parliament for Germany and a member of the European Green Party and has a very long career and history in environmental protection. So it's really great to have you all. And if we could just start at the far end with Commissioner Mohammed and come down the line with a brief remark. So go ahead.
There you go, my mic is working. Hello everyone, my name is Hamdi Mohammed and I am one of the Port of Seattle Commissioners. It's an elected position. Our commission is very unique. A lot of the commissions around the country are non-elected, and we were elected by the voters of King County. There's about 2 million residents in King County, and I am one of the managing members of the Port of Seattle, as well as the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And so for those of you who are not familiar with the Port of Seattle, or maybe Seattle in itself, we are located in the U.S. Pacific Northwest and are a special purpose government that operates both our region's airport and seaport. Our business portfolio includes 5 lines. That's the SeaTac International Airport. It's one of the busiest airports in the United States. And we also are home to the largest cruise home port on the United States Pacific coast. We also have 5 marinas that offer fishing and commercial operations, and we're also home to the United States Pacific Northwest commercial fishing fleet. And we, again, work in partnership with the Port of Tacoma and have an alliance, and all of our cargo operation goes through the alliance. And we are the 4th largest cargo gateway in the United States. So overall, the Port of Seattle is an economic engine in our region. We support about 120,000 local jobs and generate over $38 billion in our local economy. Our goal has been to be the greenest and most efficient port in North America, which means that we are striving to eliminate carbon emission from our port-owned and controlled sources by 2040. And our additional goal is we are to eliminate carbon emissions through our partners by 2050. As a highly urban port operating near communities, it is critical. It's critical for us to make sure that we are acting in urgency. I actually live in an airport community near SeaTac International Airport, and so we recognize the importance of making sure that impacted community members are front and center when we are making decisions at the Port of Seattle, and that we are humanizing the issue of climate change, and that equity and environmental justice is front and center in our operations and what we're doing. Earlier, I mentioned that we are home to the largest cruise operations in the West Coast, and are a gateway for Alaska cruise market. And that business line serves our local economy. It supports a lot of our small businesses and generates over $900 million US dollars. It brings a lot of dollars into our region, but we also recognize that it is a huge issue for us. The largest source of maritime-related emissions at the Port of Seattle actually comes from our cruise operations. So this means in order for us to achieve our overall maritime sustainability goals, we have to lean into the challenge of decarbonizing our cruise operations. We see this as a huge opportunity for us to lead the way and to lead the way globally and to take action. The Pacific Northwest of the United States has a tremendous strategic advantage for being a first mover on maritime decarbonization. We sit at the intersection of North America's largest and most diverse maritime gateway, and one of the most innovative and sustainability-focused regions in the United States. So you might all be asking, so what are we doing? One of the things that we have been investing is shore power. Making sure that we electrify our waterfront has been a top priority of ours. And so when these big ships arrive at our docks, ensuring that they're able to plug in Washington State, we have a very clean electric grid. And so we are moving towards electrifying all of our terminals and making sure that our cruise ships can plug in when they do arrive. And then the other thing is we just recently established a green cruise corridor. This was the first a green cruise corridor worldwide that has been announced in our state, and so we're excited to be able to bring our stakeholders together and have established a first mover commitment to develop the world's first green cruise corridor. And David, who is one of the panelists, is part of that group. Blue Sky Maritime is also supporting that work. And we also see many challenges in that, right? So we've established this partnership. How do we ensure that we are moving towards a green corridor? Comes with its own challenges. We are now moving towards doing a feasibility study and figuring out how to work through some of those challenges that are the size and resources of our port are just very different. The stakeholders who are at the table have different resources. The ports look different. The cruise businesses look different from each other. Second, safety is a big challenge for us. Whether alternative fuel use, what does that look like? Being able to recognize that there's folks who are on those cruise ships, so it's not the same as the shipping vessels. You have to take into account the people that are also on the cruise ship, and so the alternative fuels and the safety piece is a challenge that we're working through as part of those conversations. And then finally, it's seasonal. Cruise is a seasonal business, and so scaling up any sort of alternative fuel that gets put in place will have to be able to support other fuel option, other vessels. And so right now we are looking at how to partner with our other companies, other shipping companies, to make sure that both our cruise operation and the vessel operation, the shipping operations are somewhat communicating with each other. And that is the role that we see ourselves as a port playing, is to be a convener, to make sure that we're bringing the stakeholders together and ensuring that we are starting the conversations to come up with new possibilities. And so this challenge is obviously a challenge of our lifetime. Climate change is the challenge of our lifetime, and it really does take everybody working together, collaborating together, and in order for us to come to the table with really good solutions. And so that is what we're trying to do as a port. We recognize that we are not a regulator, and we're a special purpose government. And so working with our federal stakeholders and looking to get international policies are all priority of ours. And the one sort of message I want to get across today is that at the Port of Seattle, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, we are looking to be a partner to many people who are in this room today, and that we are ready to push to be the greenest port and push towards a greener future. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you. That was really good, and it's really interesting here about you saying about the electrification of the Port of Seattle as well, because I was at a cruise ship naming actually this last weekend, and it's equipped for shore power, but still yet to find the ports that it can really plug into. So that's a really, really interesting initiative. Thank you. And thanks, Leah, also for chairing this today. We just discussed decarbonisation that cannot be achieved by working alone in silos, and we need to work together because, put it simply, time is running out and we cannot do it alone. We're unquestionably at a juncture at the moment, and the time for hesitation is over. So future generations are relying on us to move forward and to put forward some tangible steps now for a more sustainable and equitable future. We recognise this urgency and have made great progress following our Shaping the Future of Shipping Summit in June. At that event, we had over 200 industry leaders from across the entire value chain. And as a result of those discussions, we announced the Clean Energy Marine Hubs initiative. This initiative is coordinating and joining decarbonisation efforts from ports, from shipping companies and energy firms, and look forward to perhaps discussing that with you after this meeting. The SEM Hubs is a truly public-private platform between energy, maritime, ports, shipping, shipbuilding, class, infrastructure, government and finance communities, dedicated to de-risking the investments in global clean fuels deployment. They seek to address the lack of alignment between supply, demand and the value chain. We all know that international shipping is key to the global economy, transporting some 90% of global trade volumes with an annual value of $14 trillion each. But shipping is also going to transport at least 50% of the new zero-carbon fuels. We talk a lot about the decarbonisation of shipping and the zero-emission fuels needed for ships to power ships. And of course we're working on solutions to this, and we had a little bit of that at the last panel. But we don't really talk about how we're going to transport these zero-emission fuels the rest of the world is going to use. Shipping will be key to global decarbonisation. Alice, in her report, highlights the major role that the shipping sector will play on transporting the green fuels necessary to meet the global climate goals. And as we heard, there is a wide gap between announced government-led projects and what is actually required. We're going to need far, far stronger policies on low-carbon fuels if we are going to have any chance of reaching the decarbonisation targets. There is no point in governments talking about new fuels if they can't transport them. A better understanding of the maritime industry is fundamental, as its role in the decarbonisation journey cannot be underestimated, but can unlock opportunities for all of us. We need to align supply and demand dynamics to ensure the maritime value chain is in place and at the right time and in the right locations to support the decarbonisation journey. The SEM Hubs is one leap forward for this and sets to catalyse the supply of green fuels and support the global energy transition. In conjunction with this, we've also put forward a proposal to the International Maritime Organization to be discussed at the upcoming key Marine Environmental Protection Committee meeting in December to try and unlock the impasse between governments regarding the development of a market-based measure for shipping. We believe that a fund and reward economic measure is truly groundbreaking and has the opportunity to unlock millions for the development of new fuels and reward first movers. The concept is simple. Those people emitting fossil fuel CO2 will pay into the fund. Those ships which are using zero carbon fuels will take money out of the fund to help bridge the gap between fossil fuels and the new fuels that they will be replacing them. We just hope now that we can get the member states in December to agree in at least in part of these principles, this solution, in order to move this industry forward and focus on the opportunities which undoubtedly we unlocked with shipping. So look forward to the rest of the discussions today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Blue Sky Maritime Coalition's perspective. I think the tenet of how we got started and why we got started is steeped in collaboration across the entire value chain. And we've learned a lot of lessons in a very short time over the last 16 months that we've been in existence around what the value of that is. If I try to summarize that briefly here and then maybe leave a few nuggets that hopefully will spark questions in a few minutes. Innovation, and I think about that term as the opposite of invention, or certainly juxtaposed to invention. We have different segments of the value chain that have unprecedented access to experts from other segments of the value chain that are talking to each other every day. Ship owners are talking to startup companies that are working on AI and industry-wide optimization modeling. Battery operators, fuel providers, either existing fuel providers or new startups that are looking at novel new types of green fuels are really thoroughly understanding the industry. So when you pull this whole value chain together, you come up with ideas. And I'll leave you with two words before we jump into the Q&A here in a minute. Two words that I didn't hear in the previous session, which I thought was a fantastic session that really succinctly highlighted all the things we have to get right. But one word I didn't hear was nuclear. The other word I didn't hear was digitalization or systems thinking around how we approach this. And I really think there's some incredible innovations where you might, what if, the thing about change management is you have to have a vision. And right now I think we're trying to solve different problems. Our vision of what 2050 might look like is very disruptive. You may not even compete in the same way we compete today. You may look at things where you optimize the entire value chain as one economic problem, and then you compete in different ways. If you're really going to get to truly zero, we strongly feel a lot of things are really going to change. So I'm really would happy to bring that up later, hopefully get a question or two around those teasers.
Thank you very much for these interesting insights. As said, I'm a member of the European Parliament, and the European Union has decided to act on maritime emissions. On the one hand, shipping is to be included in the European emission trading system, so that maritime has to buy emission certificates, and it's not only EU ship owners or companies, it is all ships entering European ports. The details are negotiated right now between Council and European Parliament, but both negotiating parties have made it clear that there will be an inclusion in the ETS coming. It is only a matter of how much and how, and whether this pathway will be accelerated and how fast that may be. The revenues from those certificates are going to be used, talking from the perspective of the European Parliament, we want to use the major part of the revenues for the decarbonisation of the sector. And that's, as this is the value chain panel, that is of course the whole sector. So it's not only the ship owners that have to build new ships or that have to introduce new techniques to retrofit existing ships. It's also about infrastructure. It's about infrastructure to be built in the ports. It's about infrastructure to be built to deliver new zero-emission fuels. So basically, it is clear that there will be money available. It is just not clear how much of it can be earmarked for the decarbonization of the sector, because there's a, let's say, different view in the member states who are rather willing to keep a lot of money for the finance ministries and deciding by themselves what to do with it. My position is this is a sector which is extremely hard to decarbonize, and therefore we should really earmark money to help the sector with the decarbonization, and also earmark money for marine biodiversity, because the marine protected areas that exist today are mostly, if I may use this mean word, paper parks. So they exist on paper, but there is not enough financing to actually really protect that area. And this is, of course, a threat also for the fishing sector, because if there are no longer fish to catch, they will be out of business. So it should be in their own interest to create real marine protected areas which can serve as nursery lounges for the future catch they want to have in a few years. When it comes to the value chain, I'm also shadow rapporteur for the FuelEU Maritime regulation, which deals with the carbon intensity of the fuels that are being used. And this is not about the emission, the absolute amount of emissions, but it's about the CO2 per energy which is used by the ships. And there, I think it is extremely important to make sure that we do not incentivize investment into fuels that will not be there in a net zero world. And therefore, I'm a bit skeptical when I hear a lot of actors talking about a switch to LNG, especially now as, at least in Europe, but also worldwide, we see extremely high prices for gas, an extremely growing demand for LNG due to Russia's aggression. So putting this technology into a sector which will actually increase the demand might not be the best idea in the first place. But for me, more important is that if we want to be net zero by 2050, which is in the Paris Agreement, then of course there will be no longer fossil LNG to be used. And when it comes to biofuels, be it biogas or other biofuels, just take a look at the globe. We won't discover any new land masses where we can grow all these biofuels. So therefore, my option would be invest in fuels or technologies that can be really used at scale. And while I oppose the use of e-fuels in road transport, e-fuels in maritime are a very good idea. Simply because if you look at 1 hectare of land and you compare the amount of energy which you can harvest, for 1 unit of energy in biofuels, you could harvest 40 units in solar energy and 100 units in wind energy. So even with the losses you have through conversion, you will be much better off using that land to produce wind or solar energy, which doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot use this land for agriculture. I mean, anyone who has ever seen a wind park knows that you can grow vegetables or other crops perfectly well under those wind turbines that won't be disturbed by that. So I think we should make sure when using money from the EU's Innovation Fund or another fund, we proposed an ocean fund, but let's see how that runs. We should make sure that we do not put too much money in short-term solutions which will not prevail in the long term. And when it comes to the value chain, I think it would be an extremely good idea to also supply funding to shipbuilders which are today investing in sustainable options. And that means also wind energy, to use wind energy directly, which gives a much higher harvest factor than having a wind turbine, converting it to electricity, converting electricity to hydrogen, converting hydrogen to an e-fuel. This wastes about 80% of the energy before even entering the engine. So harvesting the wind directly with modern sail technologies should be a way that we should promote all around the globe. And last point, if we want to decarbonize as quickly and as cost efficiently as possible, just go to slow steaming. Slow steaming means less energy consumption, less CO2 emission, less noise, less impact on the marine environment, and at the least cost. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask each panelist one question, but in answering it, I also invite you to respond to what anybody else said that you would like to. This one's for, and then we'll open it up for audience questions. This one's for Commissioner Mohammed. How do you see green shipping corridors really relying on the value chain approach?
Got to get the mic. So we, like I was just saying earlier, we just announced the Green Cruise Corridor, and we also recently announced a partnership with Busan Port Authority, South Korea, for a green shipping corridor as well. These are really early stages. We are talking about feasibility studies, and we're asking the questions on like, how do we do this? Who do we partner with? How much is it going to cost us? And if we are going to be serious about green corridors, we have to be willing to do our homework. And that's where we're at. We're trying to identify those things, what type of fuels will be used. We don't want to greenwash any of the options that are going to be at the table. And so being really intentional about this is what we intend to do. And so the first step is bringing those stakeholders and our partners to the table to begin having those discussions. And that's the stage that we're at this moment. But we are very, very clear about what our intentions are. When we say we are trying to be the greenest port in the country and in the world, we have to be honest about what the challenges are and where we're going to decide to start. And so that's funding is a big piece of this. Having different ports at the table, there's different priorities that different entities have. But what I will say is that we are signaling also to the market that we are interested in this, right? So there's that signaling a supply demand is important to us as a port. And so we're taking really intentional actions to make sure that people are looking towards us and seeing that we are pushing towards these green corridors in a way that will be will make it actually possible.
Thank you. Guy, if you could talk a little bit about what you see the differences between the international approach to this and potentially North America. We heard a little bit from Ms. Paulus about what's going on in Europe. There's a lot of talk here about the European border adjusting tax that may be coming. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on the differences that North America may face compared to the rest of the world.
A tough question.
Yeah.
I think every part of the world is taking a slightly different approach. I do have some concerns as a global industry. I would much prefer there was a global measure and that we could agree to do that. You know, there's no doubt that firstly shipping's got the memo. We want to decarbonise. There's technology readiness levels being evolved all the time. We've heard from the previous panel about MAN introducing an ammonia engine in probably 2024. So we know the technology is coming. We need to scale up the production of clean fuels. That is absolutely important because we're going to be competing with those fuels with a lot of other industries. I mean, there's an ambition to have 5% of ships running on clean fuels by 2030. Now, to give some context, that's going to take 16 million tonnes of existing fuel out of the equation. And that's probably going to have to be replaced with about 40 million tonnes of hydrogen-based fuels. And we haven't got yet the scale up of that in the industry. That's just for shipping, before we talk about the rest of the world. So I think it's not so much what differences we're seeing. What we've got to do is come together like never before, share that knowledge, partner, and make sure that we can all go on this decarbonisation journey together. And I talked again about these clean energy marine hubs. We do see that as a potential solution as well, is that those countries who are gearing up because they see that this is an export potential for the clean fuels. How does that actually look like? Really pleased that Canada has joined this Marine Hubs initiative, as has Norway, Panama, Uruguay and UAE, and we're in discussions with other governments as well. And we're bringing together senior leaders of the value chain from ship owners, shipbuilders, finance and energy providers as well, because working on these strategic decisions together is going to maximise the chances of success. So, there's so many great things happening. We've heard already what's happening in North America, as there are in other parts of the world. The key is make sure this learning doesn't just stay in one geographical location, that it's shared widely.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can add that a little bit, one of the reasons why we formed Blue Sky, which is the scope of that, is maritime activities in U.S. and Canada. It's because the problem space is very unique in terms of decarbonization from international ocean-going shipping. The solution space is quite unique as well. A lot of that is due to the nature of vessels that operate for 60, 70, 80 years instead of 25 to 30. Part of that's driven by the Jones Act in the U.S., which makes it non-competitive to replace. Part of it is due to just the maintenance mindset of there's way more emissions when you're not rebuilding new vessels all the time. You're not mining for new iron ore and using new steel and welding new ships together. But also, if you look at our emissions in U.S. and Canada, the biggest emitter by CO2 tonnage, not by percentage, is offshore supply vessels, and the second biggest is tugboats. And the thing about tugboats is they operate in so many different types of environments, you're going to have totally different fuels that are needed in those things. Unless we find drop-in solutions or ways. You have some of these tugboats that are refueled in transit and they never stop. They're super efficient going up and down 5,000 miles of inland waterways in the U.S. Or, on the Great Lakes, we just had a new tanker that was built. It's probably the first one in 2 decades. So we do need, in many ways, looking at a regional domestic space that's much smaller vessels can act as a pilot for what's going on in the international world. And likewise, as the international world starts making solutions that impact our coastal ports, we can tag onto those as well. And so I don't think there is a magic bullet. There is a magic solution. Actually, the most impressive thing I heard, I'm going to mention even though you didn't ask it yet. You can skip my question if you want to. One of the most interesting things that in my mind is somewhat game-changing that I heard a few months ago is we have the technology today to effectively decarbonize shipping, the activity itself, not cradle to grave, everything that goes into building a ship, everything that goes into recycling and retiring it, but to recycle, to get to a point by 2032 where there's net zero emissions. You effectively take a nuclear power plant on shore, not nuclear on the vessel, which we do today, and you use it to produce green hydrogen, which is being talked about a lot as a source of green hydrogen. And then you also use that power to run refinery technology and petrochemical plant technology, but you direct capture carbon dioxide out of the air. So you're actually reversing climate change by pulling CO2 in low quantities and concentrating it. Then you can use processes that exist today to reform that into syngas or synthetic methane, but you can also combine those methane molecules to make synthetic diesel. So to the man engine person that was talking, the engine of the future might be a synthetic diesel engine that can use today's infrastructure, today's ships, today's tanks, and it takes a feedstock for the refinery to not be crude oil or natural gas out of the ground, but be synthetic things that you're pulling out of the air. That technology exists right now, today. And the only thing, and it can produce diesel at the same price point as today's diesel. So there's no economic challenge there either. There's no carbon credit challenge. I'm not saying it's the only solution, but it's an example of a solution. If you know you have a vessel that's 10 years old that's going to run for 80 years, it's a great solution to go after there. But it's that type of innovative thinking, and that may not even be the right answer ultimately. But if you start that type of thinking, it starts to introduce other types of innovations.
Thanks, and I definitely.
Well, the interesting question is, if it is competitive today, why it is not made?
Really good question.
I mean, there must be a reason to it. And of course, I mean, being a green, I'm not a big fan of nuclear. One thing is the security issue. The other thing is that uranium, at least for Europe, comes from Russia and Kazakhstan mostly, which are not the countries we want to do a lot of business with right at the moment. I know Australia is also a possibility and all that, but basically my main reason against nuclear is I do not want to leave my kids even more nuclear waste than what we have to be dealing with today already. And uranium is not something that will be available forever because, uranium is not something that regrows, so the resources will be depleted at some point in time. And interestingly, most studies I know that are looking at the real cost of nuclear power find that nuclear is competitive today because governments invested a lot of money in not only in research and development, but also in building of the actual reactors. So basically my solution would be quite similar to yours, but I would use solar, because solar is even more competitive than nuclear. Even in Europe, which doesn't have the best solar resources, we have seen auctions where solar could deliver for less than 1.5 euro cent per kilowatt hour, which is really, really inexpensive. And I'm also not sure about diesel for the one reason that I'm also looking at the pollution issue. And if you burn diesel, you inevitably have particulate matter, which is a short-term climate force in itself. Black carbon, Arctic, we have all heard of that problem. And also it's a danger to people's health, which is why you're doing the shoreside electricity, right? But of course, it's also a danger to the marine environment. So it's not better for birds than it is for people. So basically, I would rather favor a solution where we can eliminate as much as possible also particulate matter. And my question would be, I've talked a lot to European shipbuilders, ship owners, ship operators, and they are rather looking into methanol or ammonia. Ammonia has its own challenges, but methanol could also be produced with direct air capture, so that it's not negative, but it's because you take the carbon from the air, but then you blow it in the air again. So it's basically recycling it on the spot. And methanol, in my opinion, would have the advantage that it's liquid at room temperature, so you could put it in existing tanks. It doesn't require cooling, and while it's pretty toxic to humans, it's not so toxic to the environment, which is also much better from an environmental point of view. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite anyone from the audience if they have any questions for the panel. Otherwise, we have some more questions. Anybody? Okay, so I would like to maybe ask each of you to comment briefly on what were some of the challenges and unexpected things that happened when some of you are new in your positions and some of you have been there for a long time. So new or long-term challenges that you're trying to address in this space. And then I also wanted to just mention that one of the things we've learned in our research at Vanderbilt is there's some really interesting sort of physical constraints on vessels, in particular in the inland sector, that make it extremely hard to adopt many of the solutions that may work on other vessels. And one interesting one is simply that when a lot of these vessels were built very long time ago, diesel was so cheap, incredibly cheap, that they use it for ballast. So ballast is the liquid that essentially balances the boat, so you can add cargo, take cargo off, and the boat stays level in the water. So you can't just take all of the marine diesel out of the tank and we'll fill it up with methanol, and then you can't run a boat to empty essentially the way you do a car and then pull into a gas station. So that is just the physical constraints of the vessels and the way they operate make it really hard to change out some of these structures, but not impossible, and we have great ideas on the table. But I wanted to start with you, and before we get to the challenge question, you mentioned the regulatory, the emission certificates, where you're going to take the money and put it back into the system to move towards decarbonization. If we had had that in North America a long time ago, a carbon fee, a carbon tax, something like that, we still just barely this year got the Inflation Reduction Act in North America, in the U.S., so we have something now. But what regulatory approaches do you think are still needed, or is this the solution in Europe that you think is really going to drive this change?
First of all, we are looking at CO2 emissions right now, but only CO2 emissions. We're not looking at methane emissions. which are increasingly challenging because the methane concentration in the atmosphere rises just as quickly as CO2, and methane is a much stronger greenhouse gas, which is already today responsible for a quarter of the global heating that we are actually seeing. So we urgently must act on methane, which is also an issue for the shipping sector, of course, for the ships running on LNG, but also on the ships which transport LNG. And we are seeing increasingly more of those due to the current situation, as I said. So first we need ideally international regulation on methane emissions. We are discussing a methane regulation in the European Parliament right now, but this is only covering the European Union, of course, and not other regions of the world. So I would love to see something like that. I know that the IRA has a methane tax, which will kick in 2025, and I was very happy to read this, actually. On the ballast issue, I wasn't aware of this. Thank you very much for pointing it out. I think because we have so many ships sailing the seas, which were built very long ago, we should really look also to solutions which may not fully decarbonize those ships, but which will at least help lower their emissions, be it additional wind propulsion like Flettner rotors, like kites, like something that can be used to retrofit existing ships so that we don't have to build the whole fleet anew. But I think an issue which is discussed rather seldomly in the whole sector is the issue of sea level rise. When I visited the port of Rotterdam, they were quite open. They said, well, we're 5 meters above sea level, so we're fine. But I believe not every port in the world is 5 meters above sea level. And from all what I heard from scientists which are also here at the COP, and I visited, for example, the Cryosphere Pavilion, which has some great visualizations on what will happen to the coasts worldwide with sea level rise. I think that is an issue which most ports have not really addressed yet when it comes to the challenges to their infrastructures and also the challenges to the seas that are visiting those ports. Thanks.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left, so each of you have 1 minute for, no, you're good, you're fine, to either answer the question or give concluding statements, whatever you would like to do. 1 minute.
No, I think the point that we're all making is there is going to be no one size fits all. I mean, you have to look at things individually. And tugboats that you're talking about with ballast, those are more the line haul tugs that move, several hundred miles. The fleeting tugs, not so much. So there is green methanol production along the Mississippi River that's going to be used for some tugs. It probably won't work for the long things and for the ballast situations. Ammonia, yes, I don't see ammonia working for really small vessels, and that could change over time as we do more research. But the problem is you get the nitrogen compounds emissions, which are way worse than carbon dioxide by factors of hundreds. So you have to deal with a lot of different things. And
Use a fuel cell.
Yeah. You can use a fuel cell. We have companies that are using drop-in methanol in today's tanks, some tugs, and they're converting it to hydrogen on the vessel into a hydrogen fuel cell. There's so many different kinds of solutions. And there are people already building new modular nuclear plants as well that have a much smaller footprint. So.
Thank you very much. You asked, those of us who've been in the industry a while, what we've seen change. I think the last 2 or 3 years has seen such fundamental change in the actual mindset within the industry as much as anything. And that's something which I think is a real positive step forward. I agree there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. My concern is not the technology, because I think the technology we can overcome. That's an engineering challenge. My concern is scaling up the production of the clean fuels to insufficient quantities that not just shipping, but loads of other industries are going to have to use it. We are going to be competing for those fuels. It's really, really important that we hear more than rhetoric from politicians we hear on the stage, and we actually put it out to action in the production of these fuels going forward. I think that's going to be the key now. We need to focus on delivering the results rather than just the commitments. It needs to be followed up now through the action.
Excellent. Commissioner Mohammed, you have the last word.
Okay. Well, I guess the biggest challenge for us, especially as a port, as an elected official, is balancing the environmental protection needs with the economic benefits. Our port employs over 120,000, creates over 120,000 jobs. And we are talking about everyday people. And so ensuring that we are transitioning in a just way is a priority of ours and a tough thing to balance. And so what are we doing? We are focused on electrifying everything, electrify the grid, electrify transportation, and electrify industries that work within our port has been our way, our forward thinking way. And we are doing that through investing in shore power, investing in electrifying our equipments that are right now powered by diesel. And at our cargo terminals, we have over 700 equipments that we don't own. Our operators own those equipments. And so how do we partner to make sure that we are transitioning is something that we are struggling with, but are being proactive. We have brought 6 electric tractors at one of our rail yards recently, and we have goals set to make sure by 2030 that we have at least 25 of those equipments electrified. And the other challenge that we face is working with our trucking community. For us, we have about 4,000 heavy-duty trucks that are also powered by diesel. A lot of those truck owners are small business owners. A lot of them are immigrants. My father was a truck driver. I have many relatives who work in the trucking industry, and the reality is transitioning to electric trucks is really, really expensive. And so we have a clean trucks program. It's great that the infrastructure bill has a lot of equity embedded in it. And so that is some of the ways that we are dealing with the challenges that we face, is making sure that we are putting our money where our mouth is, making those investments, being a proactive leader, and bringing our stakeholders to the table and saying that we are prepared to work with you guys. We're prepared to strategize with you guys. Just before this panel, we were talking to one of our shipping companies and asking those questions on how do we partner, how do we move quickly, and it's been an honor to be here, and so thank you for the time today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all of our panelists, and thank you for the audience for being here.